I got a really good question on Vintage Space the other day asking if I could talk a little bit about some technologies developed during the Apollo era that are still in use today. Well, there are many, but one of my all-time favorites is the early parachute testing that is still informing the way NASA designs interplanetary missions. So today on Vintage Space, we are looking at the PEP program. When NASA began developing what became the 1976 twin Mars Viking landers, it was really enjoying the inflated budgets of the Apollo era, and that meant testing every piece of the puzzle before launching to Mars, including the parachutes. Parachutes are, of course, a vital part to any landing. They inflate and create atmospheric drag, slowing a payload's fall to the surface. However, they work very differently on Mars than on Earth because the Martian atmosphere is so much thinner than the Earth's. Mars's atmosphere is only about 1% as thick as ours, so a parachute that works on Earth won't necessarily inflate all the way on Mars, meaning that the payload it's designed to slow will just smash into the surface. In the 1960s, NASA developed 3 separate programs designed solely to test planetary parachute and landing systems. Among them was the Planetary Entry Parachute Program, or PEP. Under the PEP program, NASA ran 16 high-altitude supersonic deceleration tests. This is the closest you can get to simulating Mars on Earth. Lifting a payload with a parachute to a higher altitude on Earth simulates the low overall thinness of the atmosphere on Mars. Accelerating it to supersonic speeds on Earth simulates the fast entry speeds of a payload reaching Mars. And one PEP test in particular kind of stands out when you're looking from a modern lens. One PEP test used a 64.7-foot diameter disc gap band style parachute. The chute was made of 72 gores or sections that were attached to a simulated payload with 72 suspension lines. And the method of testing was quite simple. The whole configuration was packed and then raised to an altitude of 130,000 feet with a balloon. Once at altitude, small rocket motors fired to accelerate the payload to supersonic speeds of Mach 1.3. At that point, traveling supersonic, the parachute deployed, simulating an entry at Mars. The parachute unfurled from its casing, inflated, collapsed briefly before inflating again fully. The only real problem was that 2 gores failed, but all in all, the test was a success. These supersonically deploying disc gap band type parachutes have become a staple of Mars landings. The Viking landers use them, the Pathfinder mission with the Sojourner rover on board used them, both Mir rovers use them, and the MSL or Curiosity rover mission also used the same parachute. And here's where it gets kind of neat where MSL is concerned. Because supersonic high altitude testing is so expensive, NASA couldn't actually run another program akin to PEP in preparation for the MSL landing, even though the payload with the Sky Crane was the heaviest and most complicated thing we've ever sent to Mars. So, engineers used the data from the PEP program in part of their parachute development for MSL. Of course, there were also wind tunnel tests and deployment tests, but part of it came from the PEP program. But since then, NASA has actually resumed supersonic deceleration testing, namely with the LDSD, or Low Density Supersonic Decelerator, the so-called flying saucer that is being developed to land even heavier payloads on Mars. But that's another story. I've got more on Apollo-era parachute testing in 2 articles linked in the About section below, so be sure to check those out if you're curious for more. And if you have questions about parachutes, definitely leave those below. Parachutes, when you're talking about landing on other planets, are actually pretty interesting. And of course, follow me on Twitter for daily Vintage Space type content. I'm AST Vintage Space, and with new episodes going up every single Tuesday and Friday, subscribe right here so you never miss an episode.